It's really the instructors. So how do they intend to use the text? So if they think it's something that would be a good resource or that the student needs to have or needs to have with them at home, they usually have that be a district text, unless it's a consumable that they want them to have over and over. Sometimes it's a cost thing as well. You'll notice the health book is not cheap.
Yeah.
So to make that a consumable, we would, I would have steered them away from that, but they want that as a reference for multiple years. Sort of a fine line in there between the district text and the consumable, because that district text we're going to get 5 years of life out of. That being said, we have some consumables that are over $100, but they change every year, like every couple years we get new computer books, new CompTIA books, those types of things. They're really expensive, but they're really needed that way. So you'll probably see in the spring, I'll have a couple of new books that will have changed because of changes to software or changes to articulation with dual credit colleges. So we usually have a few modifications there at the end. But really, we try to keep the cost to the student as low as possible and make sure that if they have to buy something, that it's something that is worth keeping or is so fragile, or at least it's something you can use up and not feel like you've wasted your money on something.
Okay. And you said the STEM research, that one's not a consumable, that's going to be a class set.
Correct, that's going to be class set. That's in the wrong, and I apologize. I didn't take it out from last year because it was purchased last year, and I moved it and then didn't delete the row, so that's my error. I'll fix that for tomorrow. Or Monday, I'm sorry. Tuesday, technically. Tuesday, yep.
And then Scott, the master ASL levels, that's because of the true way that those go away?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the one where we were promised that it would provide more, and they never did. Yeah. The interesting thing about the new ASL text is when I asked for the authors, you can see it on the proposal. There's like 30 names, so it's really a collective of practitioners, and so it's not just one expert. It's basically a sharing, and all of this is all online and interactive. So it's a pretty high tech text, which makes sense given the language.
Okay, great. And this is the first read, so then we'll see this again.
Correct. You'll see it again next month. Upon approval, then we'll get everything to the bookstore. They can start ordering, and we'll talk a little bit more about how we fund textbooks next month. But having approvals for the things we know for sure, and as early as February, we can look to see, is there money in this budget we can use to get ahead of textbooks? How are we, where are we situated as far as purchasing? Obviously, with the health book, if we can get a deal, a lot of these costs are based on list price or based on what at the time of proposal. But once you then say to a publisher, we're going to order 1,000 or 450, sometimes the costs come back better. So the earlier we get out ahead of that, the better.
Are there ever any, because we're going into more either the STEM or the healthcare, are there ever any grants or anything that covers or helps us with those?
Not really. There used to be an Illinois student loan, textbook loan program, but even when we had that, we didn't qualify for much of it given our school socioeconomic status. We can't really use grants for that sort of thing, title grants, etc. So we do the best that we can, in this particular area. That's ultimately why we've really liked our system. I mean, I don't know of anyone else who pays $75 plus the cost of consumables for their textbooks in a high school. And last time we did a survey, we were among the cheapest. That being said, as we go to more digital texts, that model might be a little more challenging, but we'll talk a little bit more about that next month.
Great. Anybody else? Okay, great. Thanks, Scott. Okay, we'll move on to the next item under technology, which just goes right back to you, Scott.
Yes, indeed.
One-to-one technology launch and infrastructure upgrades review.
All right, thank you. So yeah, as we've talked a little bit this year, we wanted to give you a wider perspective of where we are technologically, both from the start of this year and kind of where we even were a year ago, all the way up to what we're looking to do next year. So it was actually at the December meeting in 2020 that we decided, that the board decided we really wanted to have a one-to-one rollout for the entire school. Our plan had been a 3-year implementation of one-to-one, having a pilot year, a South Campus implementation, and then a North Campus implementation, which was all made a whole lot of sense until COVID happened. And then the board, very rightly said, what can we do to sort of accelerate this timeline? Accelerating that timeline, working with our partner school tech team, we were able to do quite a bit of work. We rewired both campuses entirely. That was something that we had wanted to do all along and felt that it was sort of that fiber backbone is what would really get us on the right track. The other piece, but that was something we'd already had in place. The other piece that was a little more challenging, we didn't think it would be delayed as much as it was, but it was to upgrade the Wi-Fi, not the Wi-Fi, upgrade the internet access. So I've talked a little bit about it. So as Ed Tennant about our challenges in getting that started, we were given assurances to be ready to go in August. Obviously that didn't happen. That being said, now that it is all fully implemented, upgraded, uploaded, and all of our agreements with the Metropolitan Municipal Consortium with Western Springs, everything is flying. I mean, we don't have any problems any longer with that sort of connectivity to the internet. We were able to get all the Chromebooks and get them all not only sent, but imaged and processed with cases for the first day of school. We were told by a number of people we were crazy and that wasn't going to happen, but that did happen, so we were thrilled about that. We also had a couple of things to change. We were trying to do a single sign-on, and we're still working some of the kinks out on that, where a student signs in once, they have access to everything that they need. We went back and forth with our consultants and our tech coaches to try and figure out why it wasn't working the way it should be. And from mid-November to right before winter break, we had a lot of really concerted work that really made a lot of changes. So that's been working much better as well. As we looked into second semester, we're in a place where we can start to see where we've been and what's next. All actively enrolled students are making use of the Chromebooks, with the exception of a few small groups. On any school day, approximately 2.6 of LT students are assigned an additional Chromebook through our help desks, either while the primary assigned units are in for technical assistance or repairs or due to not having a fully charged device. We were always worried about Chromebooks, whether they could hold up. And what we found is we've had about 100 that have needed to be sent out for various repairs or that couldn't be completed around here. And we've only lost about a half dozen beyond repair. And rarely was it due to a problem with the actual computer. It was teenagers using technology sometimes, or putting something in a bag, or Ed has a lot of really good stories about that. So with the delay of the internet bandwidth, that was very challenging at the start of the year. There's no doubt about it, and we talked about it both at the board table and also in our committees. That being said, the more that we have been able to get the people who are experiencing the challenges with the people who are helping make those solutions, the more we have been able to move forward. So that's really been, it was not a great start in that sense, but it really has turned a corner, and we are looking at making the most of the technology now. And as you look back again, our goal wasn't to do 4,100 devices on a brand new network with all new. The fact that we did have some hiccups, certainly we wish we wouldn't have, but we feel that we've made some great strides there. So our next steps is to upgrade our Wi-Fi. We upgraded Wi-Fi a few years ago. Our current consultants believe we should go in a different direction with our Wi-Fi, and that's something we're working on to start with next year, to upgrade and update that wireless, that Wi-Fi. If you recall, when and those of you that weren't on the board, you wouldn't know this, school tech team, when they said they didn't like our Wi-Fi, said it was about a $250,000 replacement. And they suggested we do that a year and a half ago. We've been able to use our existing Wi-Fi, get more of value out of that Wi-Fi system, and not have that be the choke point with our rollouts. So it hasn't been the disaster that our consultants were concerned about, but we are now at a point where we can feel we can financially and positively make that shift and upgrade and feel like we got value out of what we had prior to working with our consultants. So that's a positive. One of the things we're looking to do also is upgrade and standardize our email. We have been a Microsoft Office school for a very long time. We made a shift with students to Google and the Google platform, and we've kept the Microsoft platform for the adults, basically. We've been sort of bouncing back and forth between the two. That causes some challenges and disruptions. One of our next steps is to move entirely into that Google infrastructure, and actually the growth that Google has done lately in partnering with Microsoft, believe it or not, is you can emulate everything in Microsoft through Google. So people are not going to, it's not going to be as big of an issue as people think it is. It will cause them to not have to authenticate as frequently, not have to log in as frequently. It'll make some improvements. It's one of those where it's going to take a lot of work on the back end. People might not notice a whole lot, but it'll actually improve the experience for everyone. And then also our phone system. We have a phone system that's over 18 years of age. It cannot do voice over IP. It cannot send digital messaging to anybody. It can't alert you that you've had a phone call unless you have a physical phone with a blinking light on it. Good old-fashioned. There are many things that we could do with an upgrade to our telecommunications, and that's something that we put into our original budget. It's something that now that we've got the one-to-one rolling, we're looking to begin in earnest in making that shift for next year. Also, as far as support for teachers, we added a 5th tech coach in the second quarter to help support our teachers with the rollout. At the start of the year, our tech coach, well, for years we've had tech coaches, and they have really done a lot of work to help integrate technology in the classroom. With the Chromebooks, that job has only gotten more demanding, and with some of the challenges we had in the fall, that became, unfortunately, they became more triage than instructional coaches. So as we're making this turn into second semester, our tech coaches had some really great Institute Day training for our teachers. I listed all the different things that they had there. Everything from not only how to improve what's going on in the classroom and make some shifts in teaching, but also even how to manage retakes, how to manage Canvas and Infinite Campus better. Rebecca Riven is here, one of our tech coaches. She wanted to share a few things with you about what she's seen from the teacher side of things. She is sporting our new tech t-shirts that she'll tell you about how you could win one if you want one. And
yeah, play some bingo. I am the longest serving tech coach, but I really wanted to tell you that we appreciated that 5th tech coach this year. It's been challenging. So we look forward to helping teachers create a blended learning classroom, and that is where we try to focus. And blending, not replacing everything you've done, but blending this new technology into all these wonderful curriculum that they've developed. But very few of us teachers were ever students in a blended learning environment. So it's an important goal of ours is on our training, and we pivoted real quickly last week to do it virtually, but I still feel like we gave a very valuable experience, and we try to put the teachers as the students so that they can experience, instead of us telling you what this is like, they are feeling what it's like to earn a badge on Canvas. So the way you can win a t-shirt is we set up a tech bingo game. So it's a Google Doc, and as we are growing in that direction, very few times the teachers are the students. They got to submit a Google assignment. They are members of our Canvas page, so the tech coaches are the teachers and the teachers are the students on the tech Canvas page. So it's a really good experience, I think, for them to see from the student perspective, and it's valuable for them, and we call that blended learning. Again, we were able to do this virtually last week, and we are prepared to assist teachers to implement their ideas into their classrooms. Scott gave a very good summary, so I'm happy to answer any questions, and I want to again thank you for your time and your support.
Thanks, Rebecca.
You're welcome.
I want to add real quickly, I mean, Scott mentioned, obviously the fall, we had a lot of turbulence with technology and internet access. And our 5 tech coaches, Rebecca and Jeremy and Joseph and Callie and Dara, were amazing in supporting our teachers, problem solving in the moment. Could not have made it through the fall semester without them. So wanted to give them huge kudos for, in a very difficult situation, getting us through that. And our IT staff as well, Ed and the whole David and the whole group. So thank you guys.
At the peak, they got 500 emails in 1 week.
Got a lot of steps, I'm sure, in that day.
Well, you find out every morning what's broken, unfortunately. But the teachers, I have to say, kept trying.
Yep.
We wouldn't have noticed what was broken if they weren't trying to use that technology. So I do applaud the teachers. They haven't given up. You know, they had to pivot quickly, as we all have, and make those hard copies, but they keep trying. And the consistency of the Chromebooks has helped greatly because we know what the devices are. But unfortunately, if we're providing those devices and then they're not working, that's a flaw too. But we're working through the growing pains for sure.
How are, I mean, the teachers for this next semester, do you feel like as we're getting on more solid ground with the bandwidth or all the stuff, do you feel like they're getting on solid ground, the teachers?
Yes, we've had some snafus and it's been inconsistent what's available. Again, if it was broken for everybody, that'd be fine. We know it was broken, but there was some very inconsistent experiences, and that's one of the trickiest things. So YouTube wasn't working for everybody. It was working for some people. So when you're trying to provide videos for students who are out due to quarantining, it just added that another layer, but that has been resolved. So it's just been a lot of things we relied on that were going to be there that weren't, but it has been resolved, but the teachers keep trying. So I appreciate that from them.
And what, again, was the reason I know we had some problems, was it ClassLink that was the single user login?
Yeah, that is correct.
And what was the reason that we were having do you know why we were having some trouble, and or maybe I should ask, what was the benefit of it? Because I know we have several different platforms. Is it just that they would have to have different passwords for everything? And
Right, so it's really not only simpler as far as a login, it also is a security feature, and so you can't get into applications that you don't have access to. It's a way that we can keep track of our licensing. That being said, that shouldn't be the driver for something that's front-facing to students. I think a lot of our teachers were unsure of what that really meant, and so the things they needed weren't on there, so we had to work to get things on. We spent quite a bit of time getting new software titles added to different courses. And even then, we were finding that there were, just given the way that our system was set up with 2 campuses, like every time I go to South Campus, I have to log in differently, that kind of thing. So those are some things we had to work out the kinks of, and we had to really take it to the school tech team folks and go, this is not how it's supposed to work, and then fix it. So that we would work sort of through those problems. It's still, again, not perfect, but it's one of those pieces that has a lot of benefits as we move away from this Microsoft to this Google. That will actually solve a lot of those problems. And then there's some other features that we're looking at going forward. That being said, because it was sort of the block, people had sort of a negative, well, not a sort of, people had a negative view of ClassLink for sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
School tech team, I know that was it's been a big partnership. Is that working out as well or better or worse than expected?
So I'd say we went through growing pains with them as well. And anytime you've got really intelligent people in the same room with differing opinions of how things go, that's when you have some challenges, and that's what we had in the fall. We were also working, we were down some techs as well, So once we added new Dave, he had some experience doing a lot of these things at a previous district. He and school tech team have been able to make some things work. I meet every Thursday with Ted, Ted Lemmy from school tech team, along with Ed Tennant, and we sort of triage the things that need to be worked. I meet every week with the tech coaches, and Ed Tennant and I meet with them, and they're telling us this is what needs to be fixed. So we've really sort of cut through all the layers and said, look, this has got to be transactional. This isn't working. How do we fix it? This person can tell you how to fix it. Once we kind of got to that and everyone stopped sort of, well, I think it should be this way, I think it should be this way, we were able to move forward. So it was and you know, on top of it, things weren't working right. It was a little bumpy in the fall, no doubt about it. But school tech team is ready to work through this new Wi-Fi piece. We've had lengthy discussions about the transition to all Google, you know, and then obviously they've had experience doing the phone systems as well. We do have a partnership with them for one more year, and so we're looking to see, you know, where that is at the end of next year. So.
It's got the Wi-Fi, that is just that we'll have a more robust Wi-Fi experience as part of this rollout?
Correct. So the way, and Wi-Fi is pretty, Ed is way better at explaining this than I am, but Ed's running the board back there. So, but essentially the new Wi-Fi can switch when a student moves better. It can also, so it doesn't lose things or disconnect. We've also need to upgrade those closets. So everything that is, the Wi-Fi is wired all the way to a closet. So it's wireless from the computer to the unit. That unit goes to a closet. That closet goes to all the new fiber that we put in. So when we upgrade the Wi-Fi, we'll also be upgrading those closets. So again, there's a lot of technology that's been added since we last put things in that can supposedly move things better, keep things connected better, get connected faster, all that sort of thing. Prior to the change in our broadband, you could tell when, say, a period started because everything got slow, and then everybody connected, and they would have to keep doing that. The newer Wi-Fi won't have as many of those issues. So again, it's all.
Anecdotally, I heard North Campus was a little more challenging, I think. South Campus was a little maybe more smooth, but.
I don't know, Ed, would you say North or South was more challenging? Yeah. I mean, North Campus has problems with Wi-Fi because of the walls.
Yeah.
But South Campus has problems too because you have lockers lining the hallways with glass that has metal in it. And so it's actually, for some, it's worse. It depends on the type of radio frequency you're using. And that's all I know about that.
Well, it's, like I said, it's pretty impressive that it had to be really flipped on its head from a 3-year rollout to like now. So, thank you.
Yes, it's literally been a year.
That's true. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca.
I got a question,
Oh,
Rebecca, and you're probably the best to handle. Is the same question about school tech team, but for better lesson. How has that been working out? And is that kind of, are you happy, better than expected?
They were great. Again, I've been a long-serving tech coach, but we've never been one-to-one, and we'd started going to conferences, and we couldn't find sessions to attend that weren't relevant to schools that weren't one-to-one. We were about the last school to do it. So having Better Lesson as a resource was amazing for us last year. We participated, the tech coaches, as students, or actually as regular teachers first semester, and then second semester we met with a trainer to train us to be trainers. Just kind of shifted that a little bit, and they had great resources. It was about 30 minutes every other week, and I found that very valuable.
And we're continuing with them also, right?
Right, we'll be getting started again in a few weeks with another group of teachers. The fall was, again, and this had nothing to do with the technology side, but just coming back to school and whatnot, we had people were just not into the mood for doing some extra tech coaching. So we did not have as many sign up in the fall. But I think now that people see the tools and how they could use the tools, and just in talking with the folks who've been through the training, it's very It's pretty rare in our profession to have a one-to-one coach, to have someone who's going to meet with you that frequently, set some goals, give you some ideas, be there when things don't work. It's pretty rare. And so for the folks who've been through it, they found it to be very, almost like a lifeline. Like people said, I don't know why I'm doing this is stupid. And then 2 weeks into it, they're like, I can't survive without my coach. So it's been a good experience for those who've been able to do it.
That being said, I feel like we can augment or even replace that eventually. I don't think we need a relationship with them forever.
Correct.
But it was an excellent investment, in my opinion. It was what we needed at the time, for sure.
I'm glad you brought that up. I couldn't remember the name. And when is that contract up then, Scott? Is it?
The contract is by seat, so we have, I don't know exactly how many more seats left, but until we use up all the seats, we'll decide if we want to buy more or not. We have enough, certainly, for this spring, and then see where we are in the fall. But as Rebecca said, too, our goal is to have our tech coaches be that person, so they're not computer triage, they're instructional coaches.
Right.
What they are.
Well, I think I'm hoping we celebrated a little bit in the fall, but a huge accolade to all of you guys, Ed and Scott and the whole team, for getting the Chromebooks in everybody's hands was absolutely amazing. And I know that was crazy amounts of work. And you guys, the 5 tech coaches, and scrambling because we put all those Chromebooks in everybody's hands. Thank you. Thank you so much for all the work you guys were doing.
Thank you for your kind words.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Is that it then, Scott?
That's all I have.
Thank you so very much. And thanks, Ed, too. Thanks, Rebecca. All right, guess we will move on next to Mr. Sajak with facilities. First up, we have the Bennett Field scoreboard proposal.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you. So let's just kind of reboot this a little bit. About a little bit more than a year ago, we started having discussions about a Bennett Field scoreboard replacement. And really the purpose for that is because the scoreboard we have out there is roughly 20 years old, and we're having a few more frequent breakdowns with it, and it's also becoming more difficult to find replacement parts for it as we go. And so John Grunke, who I don't believe is here tonight, was having some conversations with the boosters, and boosters had decided that they would, based on another model, different model type of thing, that they would provide $59,000 to the district to replace that scoreboard. So we started having some conversations, obviously about the direction of the board. The scoreboard that John Grunke had proposed and talked about with the boosters was a video scoreboard. So different than sort of what I term sort of the analog scoreboard of today, where you just have the letters and you can change the numbers and types of things up there based on score and that sort of thing. So that was the initial look. As we started looking further into it, and then of course the board started having some conversations about it, the Alumni Association also agreed that they would provide a $59,000 grant to the district as well. So roughly $118,000 for the board to purchase the scoreboard. Through that process, I had contacted the Village of Western Springs and said we were looking at the possibility of replacing the scoreboard. Is there anything here that we would need to do because of the difference in the type of the board? And they said yes, there was one thing that we really had to do, and that is we had to apply for an amendment to our conditional use permit for the field. And so we have done that. That is kind of a long process, involves 4 meetings, one of which is completed. We now have a public hearing with the village scheduled for January 31st, if I remember correctly. I think I had it on here. Yeah, January 31st at 7 p.m. And the village holds that public hearing. However, we will be mailing out, the district will be mailing out notices to the residents that are required. I think it was about within 200 feet of the property. And so we'll be mailing out notices this week to the residents and property owners that public hearing will be taking place. In addition to that, we're also we are going to host a separate meeting I believe right now we're going to look for, I think, January 26th, so a few days, about 5 days before that public hearing, so that we can also have a meeting with the residents, answer any of their questions before we get to that public hearing, just as kind of a good faith, goodwill, gesture to have them fully understand what's going on here. When you see this notice that goes out about the public hearing, it's 3 pages long, it's full of a lot of legal jargon, that sort of thing. And so we really want people to understand that all that we're doing here is, again, asking for this amendment to the conditional use permit and then simply changing out the scoreboard. There's nothing else that we're doing to the property in any way, shape, or form. And so that is where we stand right now. We anticipate knowing, having at least a pretty good idea from the Village of Western Springs by February 14th. They have a meeting, technically the third meeting of what we've asked for on the 14th of February. And so with us having progressed now to this particular point, as you may recall, back in June, that was the last time that we talked about it here at the board level, and we wanted to bring this back so that we could kind of finalize our discussion here and start making our plans to look at bid specifications or quote specifications, depending on whether we need to bid this particular project or not. And so really at this point, we're kind of looking for the board to obviously not tonight, but to at next Tuesday night's meeting, give us some authority to start moving forward and looking at replacing that scoreboard with one of the options that we have here before you tonight. So that being said, kind of going back to what we talked about before in June, I brought back the 4 options that we looked at before. I will tell you that option number 4 is the most preferred of the options. That is the scoreboard that we applied for, the size of the scoreboard that we applied for to the village, so they are aware of that size scoreboard. It obviously is also the largest of the scoreboards as well. And so that really is the one that we were looking at. The scoreboard itself, just for reference point when I talked about bidding the project, the scoreboard itself can be purchased without going through the bid process because there's an exception as far as data, transfer of data and that sort of thing, information, which we can go through and we can pick whatever scoreboard we want and do it that way. However, with this particular scoreboard, with the size of this one, the current infrastructure that we have in place that supports the scoreboard will need to be changed. And I don't know, Ed or Paul, I don't know if you want to kind of add a little bit to that in terms of what we're talking about there, but if you look at the current scoreboard, you'll see that there's concrete piers and also structural support steel, which is not going to be sufficient for a new board, obviously, of this size. So I don't know, Ed, if you want to talk a little bit more, expand on what I'm talking about here.
As usual, you've got it covered pretty well. But
thanks.
The board's a little bit bigger. Wind loads come into effect when you have that because it kind of operates like a sail. We don't want the board falling over, obviously, when you spend that kind of money. So it would be pulling out the steel, putting in new steel foundations, potentially new data run and power to that, depending on which board that you guys go with. So those would be all the pieces we'd have to add in.
What dollars-wise ballpark of all the steel and all that stuff?
I believe the steel's in the quote, isn't it, Brian?
It is in the quote for roughly that $200,706. That was all included in there. Now again, we need to take a look at this just to verify the direction that we want to go, and so we may have to bid that as a separate project, or at least get a quote on a separate project for that part of it. But we can kind of talk through that. But it is in the quote.
That is part of that 200,000.
It is. That's correct. And again, just for a point of clarification, as I mentioned in the executive summary here, these are quotes back from June. I anticipate that there has been a little movement in some of those numbers, but I didn't want to go back and ask for all these different quotes again until we kind of nail down the direction we want to go, and then we can kind of see where we're headed.
And I have been told there has been movement in the pricing. They haven't been able to give me a percentage for order of magnitude, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was somewhere around 10%, but hopefully not that much.
So that installation line item on all of these options is what we're talking about, that
Correct.
concrete laying the ground and drilling holes and steel beams were included.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there isn't going to be another contractor that would be involved. It's included in this cost.
Well, there could be. There could be another contractor involved.
There could
So
be.
if we were to buy the board by itself and then we went out to bid for the installation, we could do that.
Okay.
And so that would be a separate contractor. I need to do a little more research to determine whether that part of it would be exempt under that, that exemption in the bidding law, and I'm kind of on the fence about that. I think it's something that we'll need to do a little more research on.
And is this the only provider of digital scoreboards that, I mean, or is this the recommendation? What, I guess I'm trying to understand a little bit more.
There's probably maybe 3 to 4 vendors that do these types of scoreboards. They all have different merits. You know, it's like comparing a Ford and a Toyota, and they are all a little bit different. This is one of the ones that you'll see at most professional stadiums, most college-level stadiums. It's a high-quality product that's, you know, really meant to last. Not that the other ones won't, but that's why we started here. But we can certainly engage other companies and get other pricing.
And I believe the current scoreboard was manufactured by this company as well.
Yeah.
It's some time ago, obviously, probably 20, 22 years ago, and there actually they're offering, you know, a discount to us based on the existing customer, you know, kind of discount pricing. So that's what they're giving us.
And that's about 20 years old.
Yes.
How big is that one?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. Ed, any idea?
10 by 20 is what's jumping out at me.
Yeah.
Somewhere in that range, but is it? We can get back to you on that. I don't want to give you the wrong thing.
And really, the smallest option on here starts at 12 feet by 25, I think.
Yes.
So,
That actually might be the size of the existing. I think we did ask them to size an option that was almost in kind exactly, so.
Who else around here has that option for, or something even close to that?
Something like a video board. So I know that Hinsdale has installed one. You can actually see that from 55th Street when you're driving past there. I know that Lockport actually has a video board as well that they have recently installed. Ed, are there any others that you work with?
I thought Naperville had one as well.
Yeah.
And then some others, Kankakee just put one in, but that's not right here. That's a little bit of a drive.
Are schools putting in that option 3 kind of version? Or are they, all the new ones, are they pretty much all going this video?
A lot of them are moving to the video board model right now. Again, you've had yours for 20 years, and so that's kind of the thinking behind it. This is the new thing. We're not going to touch it again for an extremely long time, and so we want to get the most current thing out there has generally been the thought process that we've gone through with a lot of different clients, so.
From what I recall when we spoke about this, I guess it was in June, a lot of the discussion focused around options 4 and perhaps option 3. I think we're at kind of at that end of things. We had just come off the lovely graduation in May, where we talked about other non-athletic uses for such a board.
Yeah.
I remember saying the LTTV kids and great even learning opportunities for them production-wise. So, yeah, I remember we had a nice
And then
conversation about it.
Sorry, Jen. And then we've got, as you mentioned, around 120,000 committed from these two sources, so that the balance would be borne by the school or the board, but I'm still in favor of option 4 personally.
Yeah. And just to be clear too, kind of going back to what was just touched on there, look, sure, it's at Bennett Field, but this scoreboard will be used for other events other than simply the football games. I mean, you know, we can use it for, obviously, track events, we can use it for soccer, we can use it for any events really that take place out there. As we touched on with the LTTV group, they're able to utilize that during those events, and so there's some curriculum learning opportunities there for them as well. So I think there's other, opportunities here to use. Graduation is one that we talked about, obviously using it for that also.
Yeah, we rented fairly large screens last year for commencement, and we'd be able to, in future years, be able to use this as one of those screens.
Well, that's a good point, though. Would that actually replace that? Because I think we had them on either side.
We had them on either side. So
don't-
we'd have to look at the
I'm
setup.
not sure that it would
We would still
necessarily
probably need an
replace it.
additional screen, at least, yeah.
That's what I'm thinking. And then, I guess, I know that this, in option number 4, it shows all these advertisers, and we had a loose discussion around some pros and cons to that, and I don't think there was a strong appetite at that time, maybe, to pursue advertising. So I guess, what does that real estate then look like? What do we use that spot, what would we use that space for? And is that also, are those digital displays, or what exactly is that?
I don't have those options in front of me,
Yeah.
but I believe those were the digital display options.
They are. Those are digital displays options. So it's not as though, it's an option for you to fill those in, the scoreboard in that manner if you want, and then you don't have to. It can be used, exactly, you can use the whole board otherwise.
That makes sense.
Which, from my experience, having seen them used with other districts, they will do that at various times where they will have just the scoreboard up there, and then they will shrink it down to a smaller set, where they'll show the students and they might have some advertising. But you're right, we don't have to make a decision on the advertising anytime soon. We can do that if we want, and we don't have to do that if we don't want.
It helps to understand, though, that if it were to go, it would go full screen.
Yes.
If it needed to. And then I would also, I'm sure that this comes up, but like, what if, using this particular vendor as far as like, I sell ad space on digital boards, and they break down a lot. They do have some issues. They have pixels that go out and all kinds of problems that I've seen happen with them, so I don't, would they fix this at no cost? Would there be, what's like an upkeep?
Right, I believe, I'll have to go back and look at the warranty on that. I do believe they have a longer warranty than a year. And then, as Brian mentioned, you are an existing client. They kind of view you that way, so they treat it more as a relationship, not a transactional thing where they put it in, you don't hear from them again, so they do try and work with you. You have a lot of facility that has various scoreboards and things like that, so they try and keep you happy. But I'll find out what the warranty is, but generally they'll work with you on the service side.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know how long something like this would last. It's got 20 years.
I thought it was a 5-year warranty, but we can take a look at that.
Yeah, okay. So what are you looking for from us tonight, just to approve, or,
Nothing tonight, just to bring it back for discussion.
okay, thank you.
And then, I think on Monday, on Tuesday, we would look for the board to then approve moving forward with bid or quote specifications for the model that we would like to move forward with.
I have a couple of questions to ask. Can the current scoreboard that we have be sold? Does it have any value to it?
I don't know, it's a good question. I think potentially the only value that might be there would be recycling some old
It's not
parts.
that we could sell it to another school that was looking for a new school board.
No, I couldn't see it. Ed,
Be an
any thought on
alumni
that?
buy it.
I think it'd probably be more of a headache. If anything, you might find a park district or something that's in need and donate it to some sort of youth program, and
Yeah.
they may not even want it just for the upkeep.
It's not like a resale.
No, not really, no.
And my next question would be, which ones can have ads? It looks like only maybe option 4 could have ads.
I think it's possible in option 3 as well, but since option 3 is a smaller board, I don't think you're going to see a number of ads, or it may be you would have the score up there, then you might flash to an ad and move back type of thing. But I think 4 is certainly the best option if you wanted to go that route, to have those up there.
If we wanted to go, I think it would help us to understand if we wanted to go that route, what kind of revenue could be expected from that to offset what the price might be.
Yeah, that's a good question. Certainly, it's depending on what people would, want to pay to advertise on there.
We could probably look to see some other districts
Yeah,
that do have
I
sponsorship
think we could.
policies and
Because I had sent the one from
Yeah.
Hinsdale, because I advertised personally for my business at Hinsdale.
Yep.
And they had there were some of those ads that were very, selling one space, to LaGrange Hospital or something like that, might pay for the difference
Yep.
for it. So that would be something I'd be interested in.
Yeah, we can at least get some ballpark numbers on what
I
districts
mean, not to say
do.
that we have to agree to it, but if we were to agree
Yep.
to it,
Yep.
could we offset the price for it?
Look into that.
Sure.
So I just want to know, then Monday, we would be voting to approve, moving forward with one of these four options?
Correct.
We
Just to
couldn't ask for,
go to quote or bid,
Okay.
not to go forward, just to, basically kind of what we did back in the fall with air conditioning, it's, we now need to go out to bid specs or quote
Yeah,
specs
that
for
makes
this.
sense.
And
Right.
then, once we get those back. And Brian, can you talk a little about the timeline of why January is important? Because you're in the middle of the Western Springs piece. We didn't want to wait until full completion of the Western Springs approval. 'Cause
Right.
Now we're in March or April, and time is ticking.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The goal here, of course, is to have this in place, scoreboard replaced for the fall sports season starting in August of '22. That being said, we'll have to take a look at, again, supply chain issues. All of that is affecting every bit of the, construction, renovation industry type of thing. So the goal, of course, right now is to get the architects working so that they can say, okay, here's what we need to have for this particular board, the installation. They can get that ready to go. We get the final okay from Western Springs. We're ready to move on that, as opposed to waiting until after that, and then we're another month or so behind.
Brian, if I may, you're talking about bidding. The bidding portion, if we do bid, would be mostly the power and data component of that.
Right.
That very well may be the same for any one of these boards, so it's something you're gonna have to do no matter what. So that part, I don't really care what board you're doing to do
Right.
that.
I feel like there's still such a discrepancy in the price range that, I don't know, I think that since it's been since June of last year, I feel like it would make sense for us to look at possibly option 3 and option 4, at least, to bid. Since we don't, to your point, things have changed, and inventory's changed, and I just think that it might make sense to have more than one to still look at this point, too. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, I remember the first time this was presented, thinking that we didn't hear a whole lot about as to why we needed it, and then I think John Grunke was invited to the subsequent meeting. We had a very, I thought, pretty fulsome discussion. I remember talking about the marketing, or the ad space as being a nice option, and my notes tell me we were gravitating towards 3 and 4, so if we could at least eliminate, I think we're somewhat struggling because there's so many choices.
Right.
And it has been a little while, but I would agree if we could focus on perhaps 3 and 4, if there's, still support for that. And maybe we can end up taking action on a little wider range then, instead of just a singular choice.
Ed, I know you reached out and we were waiting for some information back. I think we can probably get some updated quotes, right, for next Monday night?
I'll push very hard for that.
Yeah, I think we can do that.
If we're only looking for the 2, he should be able to do it.
Yeah.
So,
But again, just for next Tuesday, you would be requesting authorization to move forward with bid specs and quote specs on option 3 and 4.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I just said Monday night, which is wrong again, so I apologize. Tuesday night.
And just to recap, it seems like the difference between 3 and 4 is size, obviously
Yep.
price, and then the ability to run an ad. So
Right.
there's like 3
Yep.
big
Yes.
differences.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yep.
I would agree with that.
Okay, that
All right.
sounds good. All right, thanks, Ed.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Ed, you can stay there.
Oh, yeah, don't go anywhere, Ed, you're
the
coming
big
back
one
up.
now.
What do we have next? Oh, we have, our favorite, summer 2022 HVAC project bid results. Yay, Mr. Stachek, please.
Okay, thanks. So let's kind of talk back through this as well. Back in June and August, we presented the Facilities Committee and Board of Education with options for the summer of 2022 renovation. So that would be this summer coming up this year. And we talked about multiple projects. Right now, we've had the bid, we had the bid specification, we had the bids approved last month for the track resurfacing and painting. And now we have the bids for the HVAC mechanical work. And so as you may recall, when we first discussed these, when we first discussed these in June of last year, we had really a couple of different projects. We had the addition of a chiller at South Campus, chiller cooling tower at South Campus. Plus we were switching out all of the unit vents in the B wing, which I believe there were 23, I think, more that need to be switched out. In addition to that, there was also a recommendation to replace the 9 air handling units here at North Campus in the field house, because again, we have, those are original equipment to the building. I believe it's 1968, I think. And so they are at the point at which they need to be replaced. We have, I think, 2 of them, 3 of them that are not functioning at a high capacity at this point, and really to put money into those to repair them doesn't make a whole lot of sense anymore because of the age of the units. And so we also had a couple of smaller projects in there. There's some duct work above exits 2 and 3 here that needs to be replaced. And also we have a venting of a dryer, a clothes dryer, literally, that's over by the pool that's utilized, and that has been vented into a room for some time, and we're going to vent that actually outside of the facility, which is a good idea. And so those were all part of those original projects. In addition to that, as you recall, there was a question about adding the C wing to the Univent project as well. And so we did not obviously have an estimate at the time for that, because that was not really one of the original recommendations. However, it was one of the projects that was bid. And so I'm going to call your attention to page 65 of your book. And again, you will see, really, we kind of bid it as 3 projects to give the board some leeway in terms of, what direction we wanted to go, yet not losing the ability to complete any one or all of the projects at the same time. And so when you look at base bid 1, if you look at the bottom there on page 65, you'll see that was the cooling tower, the B wing, and piping that went to the B wing and the C wing, and then the replacement of the univents in the B wing. And then base bid 2 was the C wing, so that was both floors there, replacing those unit vents. And then finally, base bid 3 were the 9 air handling units here at North Campus in the field house. And so as it turns out, you'll see that there's one highlight there. F.E. Moran was the low bidder for actually all 3 of the projects. And their total bid was $6,331,000 for the replacement of those items. And, obviously, as we talked about, we knew that the cost would be fairly substantial. We also knew that we had a very tight timeline. So there is definitely some additional cost added because of the timeline. The F.E. Moran has and I'll let Ed speak a little bit about this because he's had the conversations with them. They've set up, I think, Ed, 3 different crews, right, is what they're kind of talking about doing. They're also talking about working overtime, building in part of their week as Saturdays. And so, those are some items that, of course, are going to change the pricing of what we're paying to get it done in a timeline. And then as well, obviously equipment and those types of things, the supply chain lines and all that. So, Ed, why don't you maybe talk a little bit elaborate on what I've mentioned here.
As always, you've done a great job. But, so, as Brian said, I do want to highlight what the scope in each one of these is, so just a little bit more. So B-wing, it is the chiller, all the piping to both of those wings, so B and C. So if you were to do that project just by itself, all you'd have to do is come back later and just swap out unit vents, and every time you put a new one in, it'll be ready to cool. That has 24 new unit vents that are going in, plus the other 24 classrooms that were already replaced over the past few years. So in total, you're going to have 48 classrooms that'll be online, air conditioned, if you move forward with that part of the project. Then if we move to the C wing, which is the base bid B, that is 35 unit vents and then another 4 fan coils, which is a different type of unit for home ec. So right there, you've got another 39 new units. So in addition to the other ones, now a couple classrooms have 2, so I'd say give or take, if you did both of these, you're somewhere around 80 classrooms total. That's a pretty large percentage compared to what you have now. It puts you right around 60% of the building as far as classrooms go air condition if you're to move forward with both of those projects. And then the field house work is pretty self-explanatory. It's really self-contained. One thing you'll notice as you kind of look at the different bids here, there's a pretty large range across this. What that tells me, and it's consistent with the conversations I had with the contractors, it is 100% a factor of labor and time. The units cost what the units cost, so they all kind of have that set price, and everybody figured this job differently to get it done in our really, generally two-month, 2.5-month time frame to get kids back in the building. So as Brian mentioned, they have, F.E. Moran has 3 crews. They'll have a dedicated foreman at each building as well to manage it. So it's project management in addition to labor to make sure people are staying on task. I will say that as we went about this and looking at the contractors on there, F.E. Moran's probably the only one on there that I would have felt could actually accomplish this in this time frame. They're a huge company. They currently have, I think it's 60 pipe fitters on staff, and they'll ramp up to about 200 come the summer. So they have the manpower. They lost a $16 million job, so they're really hungry to get this one to kind of fill up their workload. So I do feel good about that. They had a really good knowledge of the projects, and basically they already kind of scoped out everything with manufacturers. They know when things should be shipping. Depending on where we leave here today, I may tip the hand a little bit ahead of next week just so they can start to get stuff ordered with a letter of intent. So that's, they know what it takes to get it done. Just a piece of color that if you do move forward with the Vaughn building, they intend to set those units with a helicopter. It's not something you see every day, but just to give you an idea of the complexity of these projects.
Wow.
Interesting.
Fun to watch in the summertime.
We've used F.E. Moran too, haven't we, with a lot of projects?
They've done some projects in the past. It just depends on the summer and the size. So sometimes when we do these smaller jobs, $1 million is small to them. We may not see them bid on it, or they'll put a pretty big premium on it to make it worth their time. So on a job like this, they're more competitive because it's right up their wheelhouse in terms of size.
No, I really appreciate that context, because when you see the range here, that's the first question, well, like, who are we working with?
Yeah.
Right? And why is it so low?
Oh, yeah.
But that's very helpful.
Sure. And in talking to some of the other contractors, I mean, some had more overtime, some had larger crews figured. They all kind of thought about this different ways. Some didn't have the manpower, so they're going to have to bring people from the hall, and built-in inefficiencies just because they don't work with these people normally. There's a lot of different ways that people thought about this.
Sure.
This also seems like the most bids we've had. I feel like this is we don't usually, I'm not used to seeing this many people that have participated in one of our bid spec.
It all depends on the time of year, but yeah, that was good. It was good coverage.
Well,
I was, quite frankly, I was surprised because every single district that we're working with, plus the ones that we don't, are doing mechanical work because everybody got money to do mechanical work.
Right.
So the fact that we got the coverage we did was positive.
Yeah, and we backed up our timeline too. We've kind of readjusted that a little bit so that we're going out earlier.
Absolutely,
I think that helps.
Yeah, and the, obviously, base bid 3, the one with the field house, that, we have to do that one. That one absolutely has to get done because those units are not in great shape right now, and they're having, trouble even keeping up with these colder days right now, heating the field house. So that's something that we absolutely have to do. And then, of course, base bid 1 is the B wing and the cooling tower chiller there, and then base bid 2 was the C wing that we added. And so, really, the timeline of this project is such that it is the cooling tower work and the piping work can actually start in the tunnels and on the outside at South Campus here, starting, I don't know, as soon as the weather would be.
As soon as you say
No, actually,
go,
yeah, the tunnel work can get done, can get going, here during the school year, and they wouldn't interrupt the school day at all. The field house replacement of those 9 air handling units, that would be scheduled essentially from May 15th through, or May 16th, whatever that Monday is, through the middle of September. So we've already, had discussions with the people who would need to be, John Grunke, Kurt Johns, regarding not being able to use the field house for really about a 4-month time period to get that work done as well. So we've gone over it extensively. I know I've had, and I'll have many sleepless nights throughout the summer with these projects, because as I've said to Ed, and I've said to anyone who will listen to me, we can't come into the middle of August and have 20 classrooms that aren't ready to go. That cannot happen. So Ed has reassured me that with his discussions with F.E. Moran, that they're going to be on top of this, and they're going to have us in place and moving. So
I will add, like I said, they've had conversations with the manufacturers. They should have the unit vents on site well before we're even able to get in the classrooms, so we may end up having to pay for some storage or something to keep them. I have a similar project in Kankakee that we awarded 2 weeks ago, and we're expecting to have the unit vents in 5 weeks. So way ahead of the summer, but they're saying it's getting longer and longer as all the rest of the projects roll in. But that gives me a good sense of confidence that we're going to have product ready, then it's just the labor getting done.
and I'd rather have them on site than wait for them.
Yep.
You know, if we may have to get some storage containers and store them in the storage containers for a short time period. But again, I'd rather do that than not have them.
Yeah.
So, again, as we said here, you know, the total cost, $6,331,000. That doesn't include the next set of bids, which are going to be required. The asbestos removal piece is going to be required with this. We can't do this project without that, but obviously that's a minimal cost. But, and remember also, we do have roughly $3 million in grants coming to the district, $2 million from ESSER money. As Ed mentioned, a lot of districts have had that, and a lot of districts have had a lot more money than what we had to go out with and work their mechanical projects. And then we also have a $1 million grant from the state of Illinois, so there's roughly $3 million that we would anticipate. Oh, and by the way, we did receive the $50,000 grant from the state of Illinois, the one that we had to call the special board meeting for. We did receive that grant as well. So we'll take the additional $50,000 from the state of Illinois. And so, so ultimately, you know, we'll probably, the cost to the district less the grants is about, you know, $3.4 million essentially, right in that ballpark. And again, we still do have additional bids coming yet for the general work, the parking lot and the site work at South Campus. We also have, there's going to be some life safety work that's involved as well. The addition of smoke detectors, fire alarm items, those types of things. What else am I missing, Ed? There were some other
storefront windows at Vaughn,
right.
Drain tile at this building.
We have the project out front to repair the tunnel, the drainage that we have the issue with at the tunnel there, where the tunnel connects to the North Campus main building. We have some asbestos removal in other areas of the buildings that needs to be completed. So we will have some additional work that'll be coming back as well. But, you know, at this particular point, I think the recommendation is to you know, move forward with the contract, awarding the contract to F.E. Moran. Not tonight, of course, but next Tuesday night.
Well, I appreciate that you all heard our ask to go a little faster or do a little bit more, and I think thanks to Allison for being one of the voices raising that several meetings ago. And I appreciate also the depth of the bid process. You just provide 3. There's literally 7 on the page, very clearly laid out, and it doesn't seem that any sort of combination of contractors makes more sense than this one singular one, with the low bidder in all 3 cases. So very clear presentation. I'm thrilled. I think this, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but hopefully more good things to come on the HVAC front as the years go on. And we can afford it in the budget from what you've described, Brian, correct?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, as we talked about with all of these projects, the district, we most likely will deficit spend some of our reserves, and I would anticipate that over the course, and it's a 2-year process, right? Because again, our fiscal year changes July 1st. So I would anticipate that, you know, we would deficit spend for all of these projects between $2 and $3 million. We have the reserves to do that, and that is a good use of our reserves. Of course, we don't want to make a habit of that on an annual basis, because that can become problematic also. But, and then again, recall too, for the upcoming future years, in the near future anyway, there's a potential of a bond sale for the district as well. And so we'll start looking at, you know, some other projects and additional maybe air conditioning, many other options that we have with some of those monies.
We just added to the reserves, with the school year that ended in summer of '21, correct, by
It was $5 million. Now, ultimately, obviously, we're still in a dispute of about $1.3 million of that we know about. But again, with the lack of expense from last year, we did add that. We also do have, as you may recall, a couple of other items coming up here, and that is one of them is the that recapture levy money that we had not anticipated, which is roughly $1.3 million that will be given back to us based on our property tax refunds. And so that $1.3 million is, I think, a good dollar amount to earmark for capital projects. And again, not just air conditioning. Obviously, we have to look at roofs. We have to look at other, other items in the district that have to be replaced. And then we also know that, the CPI next year will probably be above 5% as well. And so those things will help with the capital projects moving forward, that's for sure. So I'm not worried that the district will be, in financial dire straits after this.
Thank you for that. We appreciate it very much.
Sure.
Let us know when the helicopter's showing up.
Yeah, and we'll
I'll keep everyone updated on that for sure.
Okay. So we'll see this again on Tuesday to approve the recommendation to approve for
That's right.
Effie Moran.
Yep,
Okay?
that's correct.
And then rolling into asbestos, I mean, that's kind of a given.
Yeah, that's right. So just to give you just a quick, brief summary of this, in areas where there is work to be done for the mechanical, the HVAC, back in the late 60s, they were still using asbestos insulation for piping, those types of things. And so there are areas that have to be abated. We have some floor tile to it at South Campus that sits, currently the univents currently sit above that, and so that needs to be abated and brought out. There's some, obviously, and again, let's be clear, none of this is a danger right now to anybody. It's only a danger once it's being disturbed, and it will be disturbed during the construction process. And so that has to be done first, and then we can get, the demo crews in there and do what they need to do. And so with that, you'll see that we had, again, multiple bids for this particular work. The lowest bid was Great Western Abatement with a total dollar amount of $55,511, if I remember correctly, yeah. So for all of that abatement work. And so, like I said, we really don't have a choice. This actually has to be done in most cases before we even start any of that other work. And so we will have a coordinated effort with them. There was a concern that the company, you notice Great Western is from Jerseyville, Illinois. And so they're from, I think, southwest of Springfield. First of all, let me tell you that our consultant, MMLP, is actually based out of Springfield, Illinois. And they have worked on a number of abatement projects with Great Western, and they said they've never had any issues with them whatsoever. We made sure I had them ask the question about the distance. Is that going to be a problem? And they said, nope, won't be a problem. They will have the workers here on site and ready to go. So, the distance doesn't necessarily, wouldn't disqualify them from being the low bidder and the responsive low bidder to the project. So that was MMLP, that was their recommendation to go forward with them. And so this one also, we would ask on Tuesday night for the board to approve that contract.
Anybody any questions? Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for all the work, guys.
Is that all we need us for?
You guys are good. You can
All
leave.
right, great. You guys have a good
Thanks,
rest of
Ed.
your
Take
evening.
care.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Brad.
Have a nice week. Okay, thank you so much, Brian and team. Next
You're welcome.
up, we have policy, and we have a lot of policy to cover. Mr. Piotrowski.
Thank you very much. I think this is going to be the most I've talked in my 13 years in this job, so. Thank you very much. We do have a very hefty press issue 108 to begin the discussion on tonight. This is going to be part of the first reading, which we would then have at Tuesday night's board meeting, and then the second reading into February. But there are 57 board policies that are part of Press 108. Now, that doesn't mean all 57 of those have substantive changes, meaty changes. We've broken them up into the 3 sections like we have in previous press updates. The first section has 2 policies. Those are policies that are just up for 5-year reviews. There have been no changes to those policies. There have been no changes to legal footnotes, school code citations, administrative code citations at all. Those are just really 5 years have gone by, and press recommends that we review and approve again at 5 years. In section 2, this is where the bulk of our policies fall for this evening. We do have 41 policies that are in section 2. Now, while these policies do have some language changes, none of the language changes as reviewed by IASB and their press service and their attorneys through their press service have changes that are substantive in nature. All the changes are administrative. It's updates to legal references, school code references, administrative code references. There is one small caveat that there is a policy in there that talks about bidding thresholds, and so that is something that, in addition to the IASB recommended changes, we do have some changes in there that are tailored more towards our operational practices, but that is something within that policy that the school districts in and of themselves can make those determination as to those bid thresholds. Should there be any questions on that, I'll turn that over to Brian Stashak, and he can answer those. And then finally, policy 3, where I imagine the bulk of our conversation is going to be, there are 14 policies that are up for review that we have determined and placed in section 3. These are policies that have changes that are more than just administrative changes. These are policies that, in one case, policy 4165, that's a brand new policy to the press and Illinois Association of School Boards Board Policy Review. But then the other 13 policies have changes that are substantive in nature. So the board's aware of the process. All of these recommended changes have gone through the Illinois Association of School Boards and their press service. We have also submitted all of those 14 policies to our district council at Franzik, and their policy experts over there, Amy Dickerson is the lead attorney for us as it relates to policy. She's reviewed all of these policies with her team and has sent back the recommendations that we sent to the board prior to winter break. Because of the length and the magnitude of these policies, we wanted to get them out to the board with plenty of time to be able to review and see if there were any questions. Again, because this is part of a long process and this is a first read, we do anticipate that there still may be more questions than answers at this meeting. So by all means, if there are any questions about these policies, please be sure to ask those questions, because if we don't have answers for you right now, we will certainly look into getting that information, review with our board attorneys, maybe reach out to IASB if there are some questions about that. All of these policies, as I said, have been presented to the Board of Education through this a very similar binder that you received right before winter break that is broken up into those 3 sections. I do want to make one last note that there are 3 policies in here. Policy 660, which is curriculum content, policy 7160, which is student appearance, and policy 7315, restrictions on publications for high schools, that have board questions in there as well too. The nature of the answers of those board questions will determine language that's either included or excluded within our board policy. Oftentimes you might see, especially in this section, IASB might be recommending language. Franzik, especially in that curricular content, they might be saying, yes, we want to include some of that language, but strike some of those other things as well. And I'm happy to answer any questions that we have. I'm certainly not the expert on all of these areas, but between the different people around the table, we can certainly get you that information as well. So at this time, if there are any specific policies that the board has any questions on, I'm happy to answer any questions on that, or we can find a different way to approach it.
Do we want to go by section 1, 2, and then 3? Like
Sure.
start with section, see if there are any questions or discussion
Absolutely.
on section 1 first, and if,
Great,
Absolutely.
go to the next
yeah.
one.
With those,
I want to say thanks for putting it all together, because this is a lot. I wanted to ask too, historically, have you guys done something this large?
Press 108 is the largest since I've been in this, so I can't.
It actually said it's the largest press update ever, so.
It was over overwhelming and also very entertaining over the holiday break. To review.
And before we go any further, I do want to thank the efforts of Marilyn, who does a tremendous amount of work with all of this stuff and keeps us on track as we're trying to do this and putting all this together. So thank you to Marilyn. Without her efforts, it
Binders and everything.
would not have
Put it all
been, it would
together.
not have come out. So thank you very
Sorry to
much for that.
sacrifice a tree for this, but, yeah,
It's really the best way to
to view it,
organize it and
yeah.
see it, so.
No, it was
And
helpful.
I think I might just add to this point, to what you said earlier, Ed, that, this is our first read. This is where we have a lot of our questions and our discussions. If any certain things come to light where we need to go, obviously we would have a second read, but then we have at times gone to a third read.
Absolutely.
So people are comfortable with that, knowing that this is so much information to process.
Yeah, and keeping in mind that same thing, as we get to that second read, we don't have to approve all 57 altogether. And we did that in previous press updates where we approved all but, and then we listed the policies that we were excluding. We then brought those back in subsequent months for an approval. We did that when we're talking about the new Title IX policies as well. So we could certainly, if the board sees fit as we move into that second read, and either as we have more clarification or might not have more clarification, we can certainly do that as well.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. So with policy, or with section 1, food services, which was 120, and relations with other organizations and agencies, policy 8100, those are strictly 5-year reviews. There have been no changes. Does anybody have any questions on any of those policies? Okay. Moving into section 2, I'm not going to read all of them. There's 41 of them. We have them listed in that cover memo as well. As I mentioned in policy 460, the purchases and contracts policy, that is the one where we are making that recommendation to have some district unique language as it relates to bid thresholds. But outside of that, we could certainly discuss that as well. Outside of that, are there any questions of any specific policies for that?
I had it. Go ahead, Julie.
Jill, you're up.
Well, let's see, it's policy 650, the school wellness. It was more around the unused food sharing plan, which I thought was really intriguing. I appreciate what it seems to be, working toward, and I just wondered if we have the structure to implement something like
Sure. Let me
that,
just.
or if we already do it. I'm not well-versed in how we handle our food services, to be honest.
Absolutely. Just let me turn to this.
Jill?
It
It's on page
is
62.
62.
Yeah, and so in the materials, the page numbers, if you're referring to the materials that were sent out over break, the page numbers will be, they won't be chronological just because we've broken them up into the sections that work best for us, but it does say 62 out of 112 on the bottom. It is in the section 2, which is that middle section of your book. This is 650. So you're talking about with the unused food sharing plan?
Down at the bottom, they have it highlighted.
Sure.
So I'm assuming that's the new part.
Sure. Now, with us, we are unique in that our food service is not on site, or it is on site, but they are not our employees. We contract with food service. So Brian, do you know, is this something that we would engage with Sodexo then to work with them and the local food agencies?
Yeah, that's what we would have to do, is engage with Sodexo, exactly.
So if there was a donation, that would go through them. So do they take the food and remove it off-site when we're done?
It would be up to the district how we wanted to handle that.
Okay.
So we could take a look at that and see how how that process would play itself out.
Essentially, this is proposed additional language. If we adopted it, then we would need to sit down and figure out how to operationalize it for next year.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I don't think it's something, I have to check into this, but I don't think it's something that we are required to do, because we are not part of the National School Lunch Program. Now, that doesn't mean that we wouldn't want to do it.
Sure.
But I have to take a look at that. But my sense from what I've read and what I've heard from some of my colleagues is that it's part of the National School Lunch Program, but we are not. So, but again, still something we can certainly look into.
No, but that's helpful too, because even just going through all this, there are questions like that. Well, does this apply? Does it not apply? What does it mean if we say yes? Are we prepared if we say yes? Or, it's a great idea. but can we do it on our own, talk to our vendors? So,
Yep.
no, I appreciate that.
Yeah, we could certainly look into that. Yeah, Julie?
I had two small questions. Policy 7190, student behavior, it's on page 95. I also noticed there, in addition to the, I think, 3 policies you mentioned, Ed, an IASB question. It's regarding cell phones. And will you be making a recommendation to the board in terms of how to respond? I'm guessing our answer is no.
Yeah, absolutely. That one does have a question. That's not a board question, the way that it's worded. That's more of an operational question, but it is certainly something that we discussed as an administrative team, yes.
Great. And sorry, my microphone's not working.
No worries.
But our recommendation on that was no as well.
Okay, great, I answered it correctly. The other one was just a very minor but potentially important wording suggestion in 7290, the suicide and depression awareness prevention. It's on page 103. There's 2 instances where the deleted for item 3, F is in Frank, and then it's in lowercase e, where it's referring to various students potentially being at increased risk of suicide, and it mentions students, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, who are lesbian, gay, bisexual. I would typically see the wording as identify as. So I think perhaps there could be some fluidity there and less observable than some of the other examples regarding homelessness, et cetera.
Sure.
So the same, instead of are, just replacing with identify as would be my suggestion, but open it up.
Absolutely. We can certainly look into that as well.
That's all I had for section 2.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ed, if I can add just one quick thing there on, I noticed that in that unique edit section there, the $20,000, actually, the request would be for $25,000. That was my error. Dr. Waterman had asked me to send him an email, and I thought I put 25 in there, but I didn't. I put 20. And so 25 would be the recommended change there, and then the 50. So I apologize about that.
Yeah, can we talk about that one?
Yeah.
Policy
Yep.
460, a little bit.
Yes.
I want to see, like, understand a little bit more, Brian, what the rationale behind that, that considered, that unique edit.
Yeah.
What page is that? We're on?
I'm looking
How
for
many
it.
pages?
It's 460, right? Is that the,
460, yes. But not in order, so.
it's on page 21.
21.
Yeah. So Brian, can you talk about the operational impact there and the, that request?
Yeah, so as we were talking about earlier, we were talking about the bidding process. And so the state essentially, state of Illinois, up until October of 2008, had, and they still do, they have these limits that say, these thresholds that say, okay, if you have a single contract for a single, service or whatever, that would be more than, on our current policy, more than $10,000, then it has to go to bid. And that $10,000 policy is an old number again. The state upped that to $25,000 in 2008 because they recognized that, look, $10,000 is, in the current times, and that was 13 years ago, in the current times isn't a whole lot. And then there's also an exemption for building and grounds, so a repair in building and grounds that does not add essentially square footage to the building, increase the size of the building. That allows it up to $50,000. Our current is $25,000. And so ultimately, that just increases those thresholds at which we would be required to bid, projects. That's really what it does. And again, most of the rest of the state has been operating with these new limits since 2008. The way that they worded it, it said, well, these are the upper threshold limits. However, you can have some number that's less than that if that's what you want, and that was always the case. So our recommendation here at this point, while we were reviewing these policies, would be to up those to the limits for what the state allows at this time.
So what you're saying is there's other districts that have adopted this?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, we're not the
We're
first
just
by.
woefully out of date.
Yeah, exactly.
Is really what we're
Right.
coming up with, yeah.
Sense.
Okay. That's helpful, because it was, yeah, hard to see it that way.
I got a question on 2.12, which is page 10. When they talk about the mandatory board member training, and they talk about what they added beginning in the fall of '23, a trauma-informed practice, would that be something like a training that IASB offers then? It's the highlighted part of the
Yeah.
page 10.
You know what, I don't know, but I'll find out, Allison.
You know, because they talk about training in different policies, and
There's the,
we don't want to buy into it if we don't even have the training set up.
right, and there's the traditional online training that new board members go through, but this is
Yeah.
in addition to trauma-informed practices, so I'll find that out.
Yeah. I think I'd like to know more about what that actually means.
Yep. Yep. Good.
Anybody else on section 2?
I do, I'm just trying to find them, I'm sorry. One sec.
Okay.
No, that wasn't it. Oh, one question I had, on it's page 104 in the 7-29.
What policy was that, Nelson?
Policy is the suicide and depression awareness and prevention,
Okay, 7290.
29.
Yep.
And it's on page 104. Almost a dumb question, but they added something about the student ID cards, the website, the handbooks, will all contain support information. Does that mean we have to do we have something on the ID cards that would have?
We do, yeah, we have it on, it's on the back of the ID card that we just had. Was that last year or 2 years ago, Leslie?
It was just for the start of the school
Start
year,
of
it was
the school
required to be on the back of ID cards. So we've got there's like a breathe technique, like how to kind of center yourself, calm yourself if necessary, and then the national hotline number at the bottom.
Awesome. Wow. I didn't know that. Wow.
So that we're
So we're up.
happily ahead of.
Right.
Not
I
with.
know,
We're
wow.
happily ahead of. Very good. That's great.
Other section 2s.
That was a lot.
Yeah, I know.
That's a lot.
One other question, that in 5.590, or I don't know how to say it, but the abused and neglected child reporting. Just another question about that. In the highlighted section that they added, complete an annual, the employees shall complete an annual evidence-informed training. Do we have that training, or is that an IASB thing also?
What's the number again,
I'm
Allison?
sorry, it's on page 40,
Okay.
and it's
That
middle
would-
of the page. All district employees shall
Yep.
complete an annual training. I don't know if we do that, or if we'd have to, again, create something, or if it's already done.
That's set up through our Global Compliance Network training for all staff, correct?
Yeah, I want to just double check and go through this. There we go. So, and where is that you're seeing in
Right
number
in
3?
the middle, it's the green highlighted, that they're
Number
asking to
3.
complete an annual evidence-informed training.
Yes, that is something that we currently do. We have that as part of our compliance training through Global Compliance Network. There is also training that the state of Illinois puts out, so staff have the option to either complete it through Global Compliance Network or through the state-approved training, and then we have them just verify it through a Google form, so we have that, and that's done every year. We have people handling it throughout every year, but they have to, or throughout the year, but it just needs to be completed by December 31st of each year. And that is something we are already doing.
Right?
I'll ask another question. This is about the AP placement on page 70. And it's talking about by the fall of 2023, automatically placing students into AP courses where they have demonstrated achievement, which I think, I just wanted to understand, we talked a lot in November about identifying ways to get more kids and more underrepresented students into those classes. I think that's the direction we're headed, but in terms of just automatically placing kids, it's such a collaborative process now. Is that something that we would do? I would like your opinion on if that's the right approach or not.
I mean, this is one that has generated quite a bit of interest among superintendent groups.
Okay.
And just in terms of determining the impact of this, so I do want to look into this a little more to see basically what we currently do. You mentioned EOS, which is, we're implementing that. So I want to see how this policy potentially impacts that.
Okay.
Scott, I'll put you on the spot. Have you heard anything from the curriculum group about this?
We've had quite a bit of discussion as well about this one. Does this mean that you automatically put a student in an AP course? Or does it mean that you have a course sequence that ends in an AP course and you move them along in that direction? We think we understand the spirit. The question is, how does it look in implementation? So that is one that we've all been trying to get a little better clarity on. The note gets to it a little bit. The Press Plus comments in the second paragraph. The district must provide the parents, guardians of a student eligible for automatic enrollment with the option to instead enroll in alternate coursework that better aligns with their post-secondary education or career goals, which is sort of an out. We don't do automatic enrollments though, and so that's another debate. Does this even pertain to us or not? So again, it's a good question. But certainly in the second part, that is our EOS programming, strategies to reach groups of students and families who've been historically underrepresented.
So that's a question then, Brian or Scott. What other policies are coming up as, things you guys are talking about as questionables or bringing about discussion?
We're still waiting for guidance on a lot of things. That's, we don't necessarily have a problem with the policy, but there's a lot especially with computer science. We're not sure exactly what they're looking for. So there is, and I don't recall the specific policy, it's a graduation requirement. And what they're asking is that you must put together in an English or social studies class a computer science curriculum. Well, that doesn't make any sense. And so we keep asking the state for clarification. We think it might mean how to effectively use a computer and research, but we haven't been able to fill in enough blanks to know what that's supposed to look like. There's some really clear guidance on using certain courses on computer science, that makes sense, or having something available for students for coding, that makes sense. That one's a little fuzzy. That's really the biggest one, and multiple people have reached out to the folks at the state, and they keep saying things are coming, so.
So then what would be the driving factor for us to necessarily adopt it if we still need to wait for that information? Would we want to maybe table it, or is it?
Yeah, I've got this on my list for we
Okay,
want more
we can
information.
pull that off.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's 660. That's
6135.
Oh,
6135, yeah.
And then
Oh, for this one,
And
yeah.
I think the one that Scott was mentioning was is it 6300?
660 has a lot of that.
Oh, 6300.
Which is in section 3.
6300 does.
Yeah, we haven't gotten to that one yet.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, further up.
That's the one, that's probably why it's in
That's a big
section
one.
3.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. To
But I
answer,
think the 6301 might have had some information.
I think to the overall point of that conversation, though, if there are I mean, we have questions from where we sit, but if there are questions or changes or policies that all of you and your teams are uncertain about, like, that would be really helpful. I think it would be informative to our decisions too, to know which ones those are.
Any others in section 2 that raised your attention or questions?
I mean, to your point, a lot of them were updates to the references that, you know, the information can date back to.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of those were even just changes to the footnotes.
Oh, totally, right, yeah.
Right, and to getting to the point that was made earlier about the board training, as the mandated trainings for staff come through, these generally come through in section 2 because it's changes to school code that these are now requirements, and so they just fold them into the policies. We see a little bit of that in 660, and I'll talk about that when we get to that.
And a lot of this is also them playing catch-up, I assume, too, for laws that have changed and, because I feel, especially for them to batch it up like this, it seems like some of this stuff, I wouldn't say it's like outdated information, but it's maybe things that have already started happening in practice, and then they're catching up to it.
Yeah, in a way, it's looking forward. They have a team that looks forward to see what potential legislative changes are on the horizon, and they start building it, but then also things that have already happened and work through it. Press comes out periodically, so there is going to be an element of doing things, retroactively with some of these things as well.
And there was a statement in the update that mentioned something to the effect of just the significance of the last year and a half on policy, and the time we're living in has had
Yeah,
a
that's
really
true.
significant impact on policy.
Yeah, making some adjustments
Yep.
to things like virtual environments and
Yep.
all that kind of stuff, too.
Any others in section 2 before we move into section 3? Okay, so before we move into section 3, I just want to check my notes here. I've got more clarification on 650, which is the unused food plan. Clarification from Franzik on 7290, which is the suicide and depression awareness education. 212, which is the new board member training. And then 6135, which is the advanced placement. Those are the 4 from section 2 that we want to get more answers on and come back.
What was the last one you said, Brian, again?
6135, which is the advanced placement
Okay.
one. Ed, did you have any others that you wrote down? Those 4?
No, those are the 4 that we had questions on. The others we were able to answer.
Okay, go ahead into section 3 then.
Okay, then moving on to section 3, we do have the 14 policies that are there, including the 3 policies that we definitely want to talk about, 660, 7160, and 7315, because those have questions that we would want to answer as a group. But rather than going through each one independently, we have all of that information. Are there any that there are specific questions on, and either myself or the members of the team are happy to provide the additional information?
I do. Sorry.
Absolutely.
And I think you mentioned that this was new altogether, but 4165 about child sexual abuse and grooming behaviors. So my concern, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not reading it like a lawyer, I'm reading it for the messaging that I'm taking away from this in the educating students. So I just wondered if it struck anybody else with some of the language. If we're talking about educating our students, it feels like we're putting the onus on them to know who to go to. So like in 1A, it talks about, teaching them how to report to law enforcement authorities or DCFS, as opposed to teaching them how to go to a trusted adult or an authority figure in general. I'm just thinking about the message that they might hear or not hear, or it might not achieve the goal. And then even for 1C too, again, thinking that it's going to the students, information on how to prevent child abuse. it feels like the onus is on the child as opposed to maybe recognizing behaviors or, when it's different in high school versus the young kids, stranger danger and all the things that you teach them. But I don't know, the language didn't sit well with me, but I'm not a lawyer. I'm just trying to think about if we're talking to our students, what do they take from that?
I felt similar.
Okay.
About the same thing. I was reading that too, and again, not also having an attorney hat, but.
And that is certainly something that we can take a look at. And as you can see, 4165 does look different from the other ones in that, first off, it is a brand-new policy, but then Franzik also had the opportunity to take a look at it and say, okay, these are some things that we would also recommend in addition to it. So what we could do is take a look at what the, I guess, the initial press version of 4165 is and where those Franzik updates have been to see what are things that Franzik recommended adding, because then we could reach out directly to Franzik and say, why did you recommend this? Or if it was a press thing, we could reach out to Franzik and say, why do you think press was looking at it? We could certainly take a look at that. So you said it was 1A and 1C, and that educates students with talking about the onus of the reporting and that.
Yeah, and it is specifically in red, so I'm guessing that this is language that our team added. So
My guess is that's how it was. Yep.
It would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Along with that one, right at that top paragraph, I don't understand what the board endeavors to increase, and again, I don't talk lawyer talk, but I didn't understand that the board endeavors to increase awareness.
They're just trying to not task the board with as much literal, narrow language and just have it be more of an intent and not a responsibility. Just to, I guess, somewhat protect the board from, if we were to ever be accused of not taking the responsibility and obligation as stated, but rather it's an endeavor, so it's like a less strong. I'm not a lawyer, though, I should say. and you have the context of Franzik.
Sure, and we can certainly find that out from Franzik. I could say not specifically about this policy, but in other policies where Franzik has said, this is what's required by law. These are things that we wouldn't suggest putting in because then that puts an onus of additional responsibilities on from the board or from the district. So this might be the same type of thing where endeavors is a more appropriate word than has a responsibility or obligation, but we can certainly find that out.
I think, and we'll cover all this with Franzik, but I think what we'll find is that this policy alone only covers the awareness of it. All of the cross-references on the next page are the uniform grievance procedures, the sexual harassment. So all the obligations we have as a district to protect students is covered in completely different policies and laws, whereas this is just how do you provide awareness around this topic for students. But we'll make sure to cover that with Franzik to find out, if that's accurate.
It seemed like generally that Franzik, when they were making recommendations, were to remove duplicative language. It is in the law. It doesn't need to also be in a policy. And again, this is just how I interpreted the helpful memo that came along.
Well, and I think to your point, Brian, about the extension of the other policies that cover that, they get to that level of what's the process of reporting? Where does the student go to? They first go to a trusted adult.
Yes.
Here at the school, then we have a list of people that came up in another policy review we had last year, I believe.
Right. A lot of these will cross-reference into Policy 520, Policy 720, and then Policy 2265, which are the Title IX and the revisions to the harassment of students prohibited and harassment of staff, or workplace harassment prohibited policies as well.
And it adds in here, convicted child sex offender screening notifications, abuse and neglected child reporting, staff development programs, employee ethics, all of that. But we'll make sure that is the clarification from Franzik.
We also, I just don't, I see this in a lot of different, I saw this in a lot of different policies, the evidence-informed information, what that actually means.
That's really the big change as far as 1A, the evidence-informed, because that's the only change in 660 with the health curriculum is evidence-informed, was added with a footnote then that references Aaron's Law. So that was the change to evidence-informed. Now, that being said, it also clarifies way deep in a footnote Evidence-informed means modalities that were created utilizing components of evidence-based treatments or curriculums. This is in contrast with national sex ed standards, which defines as evidence-informed programs, a program that uses the best available research and practice knowledge to guide program design and implementation, which does require a lawyer to tell us the difference. I mean, basically, it seems like the same to me. But that is the magic word that's been changed in 660 regarding what's explained in 4165, section 1A.
And then I also wanted to know why Frantic opted to strike boundary violations from the language, because I've seen boundary violations in other related policies throughout this book.
Is this in 4165 still?
Yeah, we're still in
Okay.
4165.
Is that in 2C that you're referring
They
to?
did it in a few places, and then like. I think
Okay,
in the-
2B, yeah, 2B, 2C.
Yeah, so 2B, 2C had it. It was also out of 3B. I mean, I just want to know why it was removed, because I know that it showed up in some of the other, and because there were so many, it has shown up in some of the other policies. And I still think it's a pretty critical component of this policy to use that language.
So why do we remove boundary violations?
Yeah,
I think?
why do we need to remove it?
Boundary violations go along with grooming behaviors, so I'm wondering if that's why they, like in trainings I've done, those are kind of grouped together. It's those boundary violations that are grooming
Similar
behaviors.
terms.
So I think they've maybe combined, but definitely worth.
Yeah, I just, yeah, it didn't,
We'll get the
seemed a
answer to
little
that.
more specific to me than grooming behaviors, but, because it sounds like an actual, line
Yep.
being crossed. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the filter that Frantic takes to these policies, and I understand that overview and kind of that pulling back, as long as I know that, we're protecting our students as thoroughly as possible with these.
We'll clarify that as well, yep.
Can I jump onto the next one? Or the 550, the drug and alcohol-free workplace. Had a bunch of questions on it, but just in, like, number 3, third paragraph down or something, it says, while working that decrease or lessen the employee's performance. I don't really understand how's that going to be measured or proven or anything. It seems really, it seems really subjective.
No, you're absolutely right, and that has been one of the concerns as it relates to operationalizing things with Ashley's Law. For alcohol, for instance, someone can undergo a breathalyzer test, and you can have very concrete evidence that someone is under the influence. Something like cannabis, there isn't that test, and so all of the trainings that we've seen have talked about that a supervisor knows what that responsibility is and can observe whether or not there has been a substantial decrease in their ability to do it where they would be impaired, and that would just be through observing characteristics, traits, behaviors that would be different from what would normally be there. But you're right, there is not an alcohol-type test that we could do.
But to your point about measuring it, like, would we say how we would measure it, or would we say, I don't know, do we remove it? 'Cause I don't know, I wonder if there's a way to kind of capture the essence of how we would identify that.
And Frantic is recommending that we keep this language in specifically for that, because that language is consistent with the language of the Cannabis Regulation and Taxation Act. And so that is the language that we are subject to outside of any board policy, and so this language just mirrors that and goes along the same lines.
Any other questions on 550?
So I got just a basic dumb question about 550. If it's a drug and alcohol-free workplace, why are we even worried about if it's measuring, if it's lessening an employee's performance? Because if it's supposed to be a complete drug-free and alcohol-free.
There are some reasons under Ashley's law where a person may have a medical reason to be utilizing a substance, and so we can't just do a zero tolerance blanket. It's not approved, because then that would be in violation of Ashley's law. So what this policy does is it says, okay, if someone is operating under the provisions of Ashley's law, these are the expectations, these are what is required.
And if they were under that Ashley's law, would they like be set with the nurse or HR or something? Like, would you know that they were using cannabis for that purpose?
Yeah, that would very well be considered an accommodation that we would work through that person from a
Okay.
medical side, yeah.
So that would be a set accommodation?
Yes.
That was in a file?
Yes.
Okay.
What other questions in section 3? We probably want to definitely tackle the questions that the board has to answer.
Could I just maybe generally assume or ask whether you and the team, the admin team, support the forensic recommendations? Or if there's and perhaps, and I know this was a lot of work to get to where we are, might there be, it was a little hard for me to sometimes follow the language Forensic was using in their very helpful explanations, but in terms of what they were referencing to, we recommend the following changes, however, we don't recommend, and I couldn't
Yeah.
quite without the track changes like they did in the brand new policy, because I know they're trying to not overdo the track changes that are in there for showing highlighting the new, but if we could perhaps have them or someone track their changes onto this version, so that we could really more clearly see. I don't think we all probably have the same understanding on a few of these, of what they're actually recommending.
So Press Association can do that, and Forensic can do that. We can't track those changes on this document, though. Is that what you're?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like somehow translate the forensic
Yeah.
words, but not, and I don't have the right example. There was one towards the end where I just sort of read it over and over, and it had different interpretations every time because of the use of this or that or however, and I can't tell what in the end they're recommending.
I think in general, we take their recommendations, but there are times when we'll ask ourselves the question, like, because a lot of times they'll make a recommendation based upon what we're either doing or not doing already. And that came up in 660 when we were talking about the National Sex Ed Standards and the consent education curriculum that we have. So they gave us a recommendation based upon whether we were doing that or not doing that. So
Right,
we
they
are.
didn't have the information, right?
Right.
So
So things like that will come up, and then we'll sit down as a team and decide what recommendation to make here.
okay. And we're not at that point yet, are we kind of?
Right, we are now. Like, right now, I'd like to go over the questions. There's 3 of them in section 3 that we have to answer as a board. And so I want to make sure that we get answers to those.
But before we do.
But I think in general, to answer your question, we do try to take Forensics recommendations.
Okay, so for example, in the one we're talking about, 550, they, kind of
Yes.
tracking between the documents, they
yep.
recommend the first green statement added to 3, but then you've got to read the memo to say, we don't recommend adopting the IASB proposed changes, the first sentence in the second paragraph beginning with upon the
Right.
superintendent.
Right,
And so, and
Yep.
we don't have a marked up version that shows
correct.
what
Right,
we're
so,
really trying to approve, and I don't know that we all have the same understanding. So again, I don't know if we can get to that point, or if we all just need to take the same notes.
yeah, so in 550, Forensic is recommending to not adopt that proposed change, so our recommendation would be to not adopt that.
Okay,
Yep,
okay.
yep.
But I know what you're saying, because I struggle with reading it too. I had a question under 5150, the personnel records, same thing. There was the last bullet of the transit packet. same policy, which is, like I said, this is page, sorry, on page 49, personnel records, it says, that we do not recommend adopting the last sentence in the prospective employer inquiries concerning a current or former employee, jobs, performance, yada, yada. And so I guess I was questioning it, is that last sentence there, when requested for information about an employee, it wasn't even really worded the same way, and so I really wasn't sure what they were asking us to strike.
I'd marked that they were asking us to strike that sentence.
Yeah, they were asking us to strike that sentence because that sentence actually limits what we could speak about. And we've talked at different times that should we get a recommendation from a school district who might be interested in hiring some of our either current staff members or previous staff members, we certainly have to be truthful with them, but we don't want to limit what we can say because obviously we want to be good neighbors to other school districts and provide the information where we can. This talks only saying that would only provide, position and employment dates unless there's a written request, and that limits what the district can do, and so that's why Frantic was saying they do not recommend doing that. It's not required that the district takes that.
That makes sense. Okay, good. Thanks for that clarity.
And Julie, to what you were saying, that's exactly what I did. I just went through with red lines, actually, knowing that press and Frantic have the ability to do those things, but we can't track those changes. Really, it becomes a red pen and a ruler type thing where I was just crossing through to keep those
I
things.
may have a few new questions that are on Tuesday.
Oh, absolutely.
This section, and I don't want to say I gave up, but I.
Oh, no, absolutely. And we know that there are probably more questions than answers at this point, and
And
more
those
that
are
will
ones
come
we
up.
could take to a February second
Wonderful.
reading,
That'll
so,
be my approach then.
yep,
Uh-huh.
they're specific ones.
Yeah, that's great.
Can I ask a question about leaves of absence?
Absolutely.
And it's not necessarily even about Franzic's recommendations, but I realized that I was reading it and I was forgetting that this is just state language and not necessarily our policy. What it is specifying here 6 weeks of paid paternal leave. It is what it's talking about in a nutshell, and I just wondered what is ours? I don't know.
Absolutely. So on page, or in section 5250, which is leaves of absence,
56.
It's page 56 of 112 in section 3, and there is a paragraph, it's the first paragraph in green under the stricken pink paragraph. It starts, staff members are entitled up to 30 days of paid sick leave. Is that the section that you're talking about?
Yep.
Okay. So in the past, there was language in school code that allowed for people to be able to use up to 30 sick days following the birth of a child or adoption of a child or a child placed into foster care. That was based on recovery time. And so what that did was created a lot of ambiguity, especially for staff members who started families where the child was born, let's say, June 10th. Well, there is no expectation that that staff member, if it's a certified teacher or a paraeducator, would be working during the summer. Well, the recovery time is actually starting at that time, right? So if a baby is born June 10th, we're talking 60 days, call it August 10th, that quote-unquote recovery time would be done prior to that staff member be returning from school. The Family Medical Leave Act allows for time off up to 12 weeks within that first calendar year, but because school code called for schools to be able, school code had to allow use of sick time during a recovery period, the recovery period during the summer did not line up with a leave of absence. So there's been changes to school code, which now allows for that recovery period to be gone, and that 30 days of paid sick time, if the person has that time, can be used at any time during the school year. We have not, in my time, in my 13 years in this role, and I know even prior to that, have not used the recovery time as that standard. So if a staff member had a child June 10th, they began the year out on a leave of absence, they were able to use sick time during the FMLA time period. Our policy or our practice far exceeded what school code said. So this just codifies the change in school code, but our procedure is still, if a person is going on an FMLA leave, they can use up to 60 days. They could not use more than 60 days following the birth of a child, because then that would fall outside of FMLA and there wouldn't be a school code reason for sick leave beyond that, but we allow up to 60 days.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
5120, the employee ethics and conduct, just questioning number 3, and it's, maintaining professional relationships with students, taking or possessing photos or videos of students. I feel like that's just a common thing these days of like, taking pictures, putting it on social media. I mean, I'm assuming a lot of, what are they, like the sponsors of different groups take a lot of pictures of their kids to put up on social media and stuff. So how do we have, I mean, I understand the intent of this, but I also think it's,
The way I read it was that it was specific to like a professional account, that it would be, you can throw it up on the radio or the theater's account, but you couldn't have it on your personal account. Is that?
I think the key word there is, for that item, it says shall establish guidelines, and we have social media guidelines in place for all staff. So it's simply saying, if you're doing that, you have to abide by the established guidelines, so
great,
that covers
okay.
that.
Cool.
And I believe it's 5185 is our electronic communication policy, which governs those very same types of things. Use of professional accounts through social media, what would be acceptable in that respect.
Got it.
Should we move to the policies that have the questions?
That 660 that we've talked about a little bit already, the curriculum on page 64.
Absolutely.
Just again, that question of what's the age-appropriate, evidence-informed sexual abuse and assault awareness. I think that's, Scott, what you were talking about before, that evidence-informed of what that means?
Yeah, and we're looking to get some clarification on that.
Okay.
To my understanding, the health book that we're looking to adopt actually covers that language, and that's part of the reason why they were looking to go to an actual health textbook, but I will definitely check on that.
Okay, cool. And then in and maybe this is what you were checking into too, number 15, intensive instruction in computer literacy, which will be part of English. Is that what you were mentioning before?
Yeah, we have no idea what that means.
Okay,
And while we're in that section, if you look at the next bullet item, number 16, beginning in the fall of 2022, grades 9 through 12, a unit of instruction on media literacy, Franzik is recommending that language and stopping it right there and striking everything out. And that gets to what Julie had mentioned earlier, where there are redundancies in these policies. And what Franzik is saying is, school code requires that districts have a unit of instruction on media literacy in grades 9 through 12. School code does not state that a board policy has to give all the specifics of where that could occur or how that could occur. So Franzik is saying what you don't want to do is limit to you're going to do these or have to do these, so they recommend removing those. So that is in number 16, a removing of including but not limited to. It also is in number 17 in that section about computer science, and then also in number 26 as well too, where some of those descriptive elements about how it would be done, Franzik is saying you can remove those because those would be found in the academic program guide, those would be found in different units of instruction. They don't need to be found as part of board policy.
got it. And media literacy, do we have that, or do we have,
Yeah, it's built into our interpersonal communications course that every student takes.
got it, okay.
So then, does that mean that when it describes that media literacy, we're not, you said, I'm sorry, I know I'm probably just saying the same thing you just said, Ed, but that all those line items that go A, B, C, all that, we would strike that?
Yes.
Because we don't want to limit ourselves to those kinds of specifics.
Right, and we don't need to list them all. I mean, we certainly can if we wanted to, but typically that type of information would be better found in the academic program guide, possibly in a student handbook, not necessarily in a board policy where it's just listing what the required units of instruction would be, not necessarily what the required topics within those units.
I again, I'm not a lawyer, but if I had to guess, Franzik is working on our behalf to try to make policies better, safer, less, you know, don't have to update them as frequently if you don't, you know, while it might feel nice to have these examples to many of us who like to, myself included, kind of round out a topic with some examples or some additional context, I think I would stress that unless you think otherwise, we should generally take their advice because
Right.
they're trying to keep us safe, they're trying
Right.
to allow for flexibility and you know, not have to update constantly.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And then when those specifics would come into play are things like the academic and the handbook, student handbook, all those other items that we supply to our students and to the community and parents.
Well, and these items are audited, so when they do come to look for these things, we have to demonstrate by showing a curriculum map or, you know, so this is always up for review, and then we're always reviewed on it. So anything that's not highlighted, we can show where it is in our curriculum in 6660. We just have to do a little auditing of some of these new things to see if we're doing it, and if so, where, and if not, how we can do it, and perhaps even do it better. One of them that I think may be challenging is number 19. Not that you can't come up with contributions made to society by Americans of different faith practices, including but not limited to Muslim Americans, Jewish Americans, Christian Americans, Hindu Americans, Sikh Americans, Buddhist Americans, and any other collective community of faith. The question is, how do you do that in a way that is useful to a student as opposed to checking a box? And so that's where we'll have to have some conversation about how do we implement, you know, number 19, for example, where is the best place for that? How do we do it so it's not just, you know, here's a multiple choice quiz, explain all the ways that the Sikhs have done X, Y, or Z. You know, that's not the intent, but that it's also not giving us a whole lot of guidance on how to make it of interest to a kid or connected to a curriculum. So those are some of the challenges with 660. There's a number of those in this one. This is the most we've ever gotten at once of things to add to curriculum.
Yeah. And I just, with an English background, I just feel like there was no uniformity or sense of how this was written. It's as if they just let any one-off person put it in here, and then I'm like, wait, but you said it differently in another place, and it just, I don't know, it doesn't.
Yeah, this
seem
is
like-
legislation.
It's a little-
This is the sausage right here.
Absolutely, we see that a lot.
It's a little sloppy.
Like, well, we've heard in this state they're doing this, we don't want that here in this state, so in this state, we're gonna say
Right.
this, and,
It looks
Yeah.
like there's been a lot of authors involved in putting this.
and there'll probably be clarification, and that, to some degree, that's why Franzic's saying, cut all that out, because people are gonna say, well, we didn't do B, what does that mean? Right. Are we out of compliance?
Right, right.
I just wanted to jump in there quickly, though, but I think that's part of the work that we're doing with our teachers. So, for example, being aware, I think it helps us to be aware of what we're teaching and to ensure that we're including those voices. So, for example, I worked on work with Muslim educators, for example, and in our resources that were shared out, Illinois just adopted the first Muhammad Ali Day, which is on the same day with Dr. King this year. So our teachers in the district received like a complete guide of how to incorporate different ways to highlight the contributions of Muhammad Ali in lessons. So again, it's just making sure that we're being aware of how we're including those different voices, and I think it'll become more natural, but I think this really helps to highlight that, and really proud of what educators across the state are doing to amplify these voices to be included in what we're teaching our students.
Well, and what you just described too is bringing meaning out of all of this, like in a real way that can be applied versus what's, Scott just saying the struggle is checking a box. So it's helpful to have the conversation. I'm glad to know it.
But does then stripping the language, as Franzik suggests, it's not preventing that from happening? Dr. O, you don't feel?
That language is staying.
Sorry,
I don't think they're
So that's
suggesting.
Okay.
one section.
Yeah, for 19 it is,
Yep.
I read their memo.
yeah.
Yeah, the ones where it would be changing for those things would be in number 16,
Okay.
number 17, and number 26.
And even 26 keeps much of the
Right.
the reference to the history of Asian Americans, it just
Correct.
some of the extraneous.
Correct.
So the only one that was affected, you said was 19 then, is the one that they recommended not to?
Right.
Not to.
This one's, and I was still going at this point, and maybe we can compare notes live. And they changed the word assault to grooming behaviors. in
Correct.
Number 12. Sort of in the middle of number 12, they did a hard stop in 16 after the words media literacy. Before that
Section.
includes. They did a hard stop in 17 after the first sentence, so deleting computer science, that's in italics onward. And then I think in 26, it should be beginning in the fall of 2022 in all schools, instruction, and then the next like 8 words are stricken, on the events of Asian American history, and then continue hard stop before which must include.
That's correct.
All right.
Yep, no, very good.
I'm gonna
Okay,
finish that process for the
Very good. And then one of the last things too, in number 5, the language in there for number 5, the green language, based on how we answer question 1, that language would either remain or would be removed. If we answer question 1 as no, that language gets removed. If we answer that question as yes, then the language stays in. But this is one of the policies that does have the questions. Those questions are found on page 66 if we want to look at those.
Yep. Thanks for clarifying, I'm sorry. I was trying to keep up, it's been.
So the first question, the Franzik recommendation is to answer that no, because currently the board is not required to offer that. By answering no, the proposed language will be removed. We support that recommendation in this case. The second question, their recommendation is based upon what we're doing. We currently, in terms of, a board can either answer, no, we don't teach sex education, or we currently do through health, and we use the national sex education standards. So we would support answering choice number 2 on that one. Because we do. And then the third question is on page 67, and again, through health, we teach the National Sex Education Standards curriculum and a developmentally appropriate consent education curriculum, so it's really the second to last choice that we would recommend answering. The other options are, you can say that we don't teach it, but we do.
Brian, that last item you're discussing is that where I see 5 choices, 2 that start on 66 and 3 that continue on 66.
Correct, yep. Yep.
Second from the bottom.
Second from the bottom. So the one that says the board offers National Sex Education Standards curriculum and developmentally appropriate consent education curriculum, and the board would like to communicate both in this policy. And Scott, I think you looked into that one a little bit too with Kurt. Anything else to add to that?
No, he said that's what we do. That's, again, that when it comes to this particular curriculum and what you might have seen in some other boards that are grappling with, it's really clear that you focus on the published curriculum. And if you're going in this direction, which we think it's important to, then you really need to use that published curriculum.
And then, Brian, did you talk about question 3, about the unit of instruction, about the naturalization?
No, that's on there as well.
Yeah.
I want to make
So
sure that.
question 1 would be no, question 2 would be second from last. And then we just have to come up with an answer for question 3. The default is no.
Right.
And I do want to follow up with Paul Houston. It's possible that they've added that to civics, but I would want to just clarify that.
So we'll get more information on that question about, does the board offer unit of instruction in grades 9 through 12 about the process of naturalization pursuant to? I'll write that one down.
So those are the questions for 660. The next policy that has questions that we need to answer is policy 7160, which is just a little bit further in the board materials. That is on page, it is on page 87 of 112 in section 3. And so I could direct where this is. So if you look up at the top, in the middle, the green and the pink, you will see where it says press +1, question 1. Currently, what it reads is, it says, the district does not prohibit hairstyles historically associated with race, ethnicity, or hair texture, including but not limited to protective hairstyles such as braid, locks, and twists. The question is asking if the board wants to expand upon that to include, additional protections that wouldn't be part of this policy.
So in this case, our recommendation would be to expand that.
Correct.
To expand upon the requirement to add any other protected classes under board policy.
And I didn't mean to overthink this, but does it actually narrow? Do you what if you're, is it better to leave it out? I'm trying to think of an example. If you're not a member of a protected class, does this actually narrow it, or am I just over?
So how we interpreted that was, outside of race, ethnicity, or hair texture, adding the any other protected class would also protect religious apparel, religious customs.
Okay. And you're not excluding, I'm gonna sound silly making something up, a straight white male who wants to have purple hair,
No.
because you're limiting it to protected classes? No. Okay.
Right.
Okay, I've overthought it. I like your suggestion with yes.
That was an easy question. And then finally, the last policy that does have a question to answer is policy 7315, which is the restrictions on high school, or restrictions on publications as it relates to high school. The only reason it says high school at the end is because there's a similar policy for elementary and middle school as well. Obviously, with us being a secondary school, we don't have that policy in our policy manual, and therefore don't need to discuss. So this is, first off, real quick, the one thing that they do recommend changing, and I'll go through and make sure, is to spell advisor the same way throughout. There are times that advisor is spelled with an ER at the end, and times that advisor is spelled with an OR. Frantic caught that. That is something that made it through press. So we'll go through and make sure that we have that. Their recommendation is to have it as ER, because that is what's consistent throughout the majority of it as well. So there are a couple in there that we can find out. The questions do come up. They are beginning on the next page, page 106, and page 107 are those questions that you would have as well. There are 3 questions for policy 7315 as well, too.
So on that first one, our recommendation is to answer no, which basically keeps it at student journalists must allow differing opinions versus students will strive for. So our recommendation would be no on that one. And then actually for all 3 of those, our recommendation is the default, which is offered by press.
Those are the only 3 policies from Section 3 that do have the questions that we need to answer. But we're happy if there are any questions on any of the other policies in Section 3. I'd be happy to answer them. If it is something that, obviously, given the size of it, more questions might come up Tuesday night, that's perfectly fine as well, too.
I don't think it's addressed in this policy, but do we have a policy that talks about who owns the content that then is created? I mean, obviously, the student does the work, but it generally resides like within the district where we publish it. What happens to it? I mean, can content be retired? Is it something that we have that kind of
That's a good question.
domain over?
Yeah.
It's a good question. I'm not sure if that's
I
in
wrote
our
that down.
policy. We could certainly look into that
Yeah,
to see.
and this policy gave me a lot of pause that I wanted to do a little more digging to find out about, like, where
We
the
can pull
content
this one out.
goes. Because obviously, we want to support any students that need these materials for, portfolio purposes, but at the same time, stuff has a shelf life, I'm sure, and, how do we address, or what do we do with that kind of material? Okay, so, Carrie, add that one to the list.
Yeah, so in section 3, I've got 4165, we have a few questions on 550, 660 on the naturalization part, and then 7135, and who owns the work, essentially. Those are the ones I've got from section 3. Ed, did you have any more out of that section?
No, those were the only parts that I had that we would still get some more clarification on. Were there any other questions from section 3?
How will we handle this on Tuesday?
Be the next step. Are we talking about this again?
Just curious.
I mean, I could certainly start by just recapping that we had the discussion. Certainly won't go through all the policies as well. Any information that we have in relation to the questions that are asked, we would certainly share that information if we have that back, either from Forensic or from press, or just from our own internal controls. But then obviously open it up for discussion as well if there are any additional questions now that you've had a chance to take a look at them with a little bit more time. We could certainly go from there, but we wouldn't need to go through each one of these again. We've already answered those questions. A lot of that heavy lifting was done tonight.
So Tuesday will be informational updates again.
Yeah, because it's still just a first reading, so
Right.
by my notes, we've got 8 policies that we want to get more information on even after Tuesday. So assuming there aren't questions about the other 49 on Tuesday, those could go to a second reading.
Well, that's just the first part. The second part has another 57 policies.
Right.
Don't even.
So I think that's the goal, is to narrow this down to get to the ones we really have questions on and want to discuss, and the other ones would move to a second reading in February for adoption.
We can't talk about each one again on Tuesday?
We can, certainly.
Allison, you can talk by yourself. Awesome. Thanks. This was a lot of work.
Thank you, everybody, and thanks again to Marilyn for all of
Thanks
her
to
help with
Marilyn, and
this.
thanks
It
to
was
Ed
so
for
helpful.
coordinating all this.
Thank you.
Lots and
Yeah,
lots
it was
to go through. Very, very important work, though. Very necessary. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Okay, next we would move on to non-agenda related public comments. None for tonight? Okay, great. So I guess at the time being, what is it, 9:13? That would conclude tonight's meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn? Jill?
Second.
And Jill? All in favor?
Aye.
Everyone go home. Thank you, everyone. Have a great
Thank
night. Have a
you.
good
Thank you for
week.
being here, everybody.
Yeah.
My goodness.